Clara Hartley had been riding for only an hour, but it felt much longer beneath the bright afternoon sun. The plains stretched endlessly around her golden grass, waving like a slow sea, dust rising from her horse's steady steps, and the wide blue sky pressing down with heat that seemed to have weight. She had never been this far from the city before, and everything felt too big, too open, and strangely quiet. Even the wind moved gently, almost politely, as if it did not want to disturb the peace of the land. Beside her rode Luke Brenner, a cowboy who looked like he belonged to the plains as naturally as the grass or the sky. He wore a simple hat, a faded shirt, worn boots, and a calm expression that never changed much. He had agreed to guide Clara across the open land, because she did not know the trails, and because traveling alone was never wise, especially for someone so new to ranch country. Luke had seen many visitors arrive from the city, but Clara stood out the moment she stepped into the small-town stable that morning. She looked like someone who had gotten dressed for a polite indoor meeting, not for a dusty ride across rough land. Her clothes were neat, tight around the collar, and far too formal for the heat. Still, she carried herself with quiet dignity, and Luke respected that, without saying much. Clara sat straight on her horse, trying to act like the ride was easy for her. She told herself she needed to look confident, even though she felt unsure. Her collar, made from stiff fabric, pressed tightly against her neck. She tugged at it a few times as the sun rose higher, and each time she tugged, she felt the fabric dig in harder. The heat made it even worse. Sweat gathered beneath the collar, making it feel like it was shrinking. But she didn't say anything at first. She didn't want Luke to think she was complaining or unprepared. Luke noticed, though. He didn't say a word, but his eyes, sharp and clear beneath the brim of his hat, caught every small detail. He noticed how she kept touching her neck, how she swallowed carefully, how her breaths came a little faster. He had guided many travelers, and he knew when someone was uncomfortable, even when they tried to hide it. Clara told herself she could endure it a little longer. She didn't want to bother him. She had just met Luke that morning, and he had already been kind enough to help her start this journey. She didn't want to seem difficult, but the collar grew tighter and tighter with every step of the horse, and soon it felt like she was swallowing against a rope. The air felt thin. She tried to take a deep breath, but the collar stopped her. A wave of dizziness washed over her, surprising her so much that she grabbed the saddle horn to steady herself. Luke slowed his horse immediately. "You all right?" he asked, his voice low and even. Clara forced a small smile. "I'm fine, just the heat." Luke didn't believe that entirely, but he respected that she was trying. "We can rest if you need." "No," Clara said quickly. I think my collar is too tight. I can't loosen it myself while riding. Could you please help?" She said the words softly, almost embarrassed. But Luke didn't judge her. He simply guided his horse closer to hers with a gentle hand and reached out. Clara held very still. His touch was careful, respectful, and steady as he worked at the small buttons near her throat. The old fabric stubbornly resisted at first. But he knew how to handle stubborn things, whether horses, ropes, or collars. With a soft click, the collar loosened. Clara took a deep breath, and the air finally reached her lungs properly. For a moment, she closed her eyes, letting relief wash through her. When she opened them again, she found Luke watching her not with curiosity, but with the quiet attention of someone who noticed more than he spoke about. As the collar fell open slightly, Luke saw a faint mark on her skin, just at the edge of the fabric. It wasn't sharp or dramatic, but it was there, like a shadow left by something that had been tight for too long. He didn't stare or comment. He simply stepped back, giving her space. "Better?" he asked. "Yes," Clara breathed. "Thank you." They continued riding, but the moment lingered in Clara's mind. Something about Luke's calm presence made her feel unusually safe. Even though she barely knew him, his hands were steady, his voice steady, and everything about him felt grounded. She had not felt grounded in a very long time. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The trail opened wider ahead of them, curving around low hills. A few birds flew overhead, their wings making soft shadows on the grass. The horses walked at an easy pace. Everything felt peaceful. But Clara's thoughts were not as calm. She had not planned to come to this place. She had not planned to leave the city so suddenly. She had not planned to meet a cowboy or ride across an unfamiliar land. Yet here she was, with a small bag, a rented horse, and all the uncertainty in the world sitting heavy in her chest. Luke finally spoke again. "You're new to riding?" Clara nodded. "Very new. You're doing all right," he said simply. It was not flattery. It was an honest observation. And somehow, it meant more to her than if he had said something flowery. She smiled faintly. "I'm trying." "That's enough," Luke replied. They rode on, and Luke watched the land, while Clara watched the horizon. After a while, Clara gathered the courage to ask, "How long have you lived out here?" Long as I can remember," Luke said. "Plains are quiet. Straightforward. Easier to understand than people." Clara nodded slowly. "I wish I understood people better." Luke looked at her, not directly, but from the corner of his eye. He sensed something in her tone, something heavy she carried, like a bag she did not show. He didn't push or ask questions. Pushing never helped. Instead, he gave her silence, the kind that invites someone to speak only if they want to. Clara appreciated the silence more than she expected. She straightened her posture, breathed deeply again, grateful for the loosened collar, and let her eyes wander across the land. Everything here was so open, so endless, so full of space that she almost felt small. But it was a good kind of small, the kind that made her feel like the world was bigger than her problems. They rode past tall patches of grass, where the wind moved softly, creating patterns like ripples on water. A few old fence posts leaned tiredly along a forgotten boundary line. A distant ranch stood like a tiny dot far on the horizon. Clara found herself imagining what life would be like out there, simple, quiet, steady. She wondered if she could ever live in such a place. She wondered if she would be allowed to start a life like that. Luke interrupted her thoughts gently. "If the collar bothers you again, you tell me. Heat gets bad out here." "I will," she said. "I'm sorry I didn't ask sooner." "No need to be sorry," Luke replied. "You're learning the plains. Everyone does." Clara gave a small, grateful nod. She felt a little braver after that. She wasn't used to people treating her problems as normal, small, or solvable. She wasn't used to calm. Luke had shown her more understanding in a few minutes than most people had shown her in months. As the trail grew rougher, Luke guided her horse around the rockier patches. He kept his pace matched to hers. He never rushed or urged her forward too quickly. He rode like someone who believed rushing solved nothing. Clara tried to match his calm rhythm, and after a while she felt herself actually relax. But underneath her calm, one thought continued, whispering at the back of her mind. "He saw the mark on my neck." She knew he had seen it. She saw the flicker in his eyes. Not judgment. Not curiosity. Just recognition. The kind of recognition that makes someone understand that another person might be carrying more than they say. And because of that single quiet moment, Clara felt something shift inside her. She felt the tiniest, softest pull toward trust. She didn't say anything more about it. She didn't explain. She wasn't ready. But she also didn't pull the collar closed again. She let the air touch her skin freely for the first time in a long while. As they rode deeper into the plains, Clara felt the strange sensation of moving both away from something and toward something at the same time. The land grew wider, the sky grew larger, and her breath came easier. She didn't know what waited ahead. She didn't know how long she could keep traveling. And she definitely didn't know what Luke himself thought of the unexpected weight she carried. But as the sun warmed the world around her and her horse carried her forward with steady steps, Clara felt very faintly that maybe, just maybe, this journey would change more than her location. Maybe it would change the direction of her life. And it had all started with one simple request. "Could you loosen my collar so I can breathe?" Clara rode quietly beside Luke as the trail curved between two long ridges. The sun was lower now, softer than before, but the heat still lingered in the air. Luke scanned the land the way people from the plains naturally did, his eyes moving from the hills to the grass to the sky, never missing small changes. Clara watched him sometimes, admiring how calm he seemed, how he looked like someone who knew exactly where he belonged. She wished she felt the same way. She wished she could say the same thing about herself. The moment that happened earlier when Luke loosened her collar kept returning to her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about how he had noticed the mark near her neck. He hadn't asked anything, but the fact that he noticed made her feel both exposed and unexpectedly relieved. She wasn't used to people seeing her pain. In the city, her world had been filled with people who looked past things. Not at them, people who noticed nothing unless it was shiny, loud, or useful to them. Luke was different. He noticed quiet things, soft things, hidden things. For a long time, Clara simply followed the sound of the horse's steps. The land felt endless, but in a comforting way. She found herself breathing more steadily, enjoying the open air. She wished, almost desperately, that this journey across the plains could last forever. She wished she didn't have to think about the real reason she was out here. So far from everything she once knew, but secrets have a way of pressing on a person's chest until they feel too heavy to carry. She felt that heaviness now. Luke noticed her silence. Silence itself did not bother him. He lived with it most days, and it never frightened him. But the kind of silence Clara carried wasn't empty. It was filled with something she was trying very hard to hold down. And Luke knew that when someone tried too hard to hold something inside, it often spilled out at the wrong time. So instead of questions, he offered steady company. She could talk if she wanted. She didn't have to if she wasn't ready. After a while, Clara cleared her throat softly. "Luke, may I ask you something?" "You can ask anything," he replied, adjusting his reins lightly. "If someone is carrying a past they don't want anymore, do you think they should tell others about it, or keep it to themselves?" Luke thought for a moment. His answers were never rushed. He looked ahead at the trail before pulling his horse to a slower pace. "Depends," he said gently. "Some pasts are easier when shared. Some are safer when kept quiet. But if the past is still following someone, it's better not to face it alone." Clara's fingers tightened around the reins. The horses continued forward, their steps steady against the dry earth. She didn't speak for a long minute. Then the words came out so softly that they almost disappeared into the wind. "My past is following me." Luke didn't turn his head right away. He let the words settle in the space between them. "I thought so," he said quietly. Clara's breath shook a little. She hadn't expected him to say that. She hadn't expected him to notice anything at all. She stared at the tall grass bending in the breeze, trying to gather courage she wasn't sure she had. "You saw the mark on my neck," she whispered. "I saw a sign someone has been living with too much pressure." Luke answered carefully. "Not the cause, not the reason. Just the sign." She nodded slowly, grateful for his soft approach. Many people from her old life would have rushed in with questions or guesses. Luke did not. He gave her space to decide what she wanted to say. It made it easier to speak. Clara took a deep breath. "I left the city very suddenly. Sometimes, leaving fast is the only way someone can leave at all," Luke replied. His quiet honesty eased some of the tension inside her. "I didn't plan to come here," Clara continued. "I didn't plan anything. I needed to be somewhere far away." Luke waited. His steady presence felt like a safe place to set down her words, even the heavy ones. "There's someone back home," Clara said slowly. "Someone who doesn't like losing things he believes belong to him." Luke's jaw tightened slightly, but he stayed calm. He kept his focus on the trail, giving her the comfort of speaking without seeing judgment in someone's eyes. "I was supposed to marry him," she continued. "Everyone said he was a perfect match. He was successful, well-known, respected. People adored him. And you?" Luke asked softly. Clara gave a small, sad laugh. "I adored the idea of peace. I thought marrying him would give me that. I thought he would give me a stable life. But the more time passed, the more I felt like I was being shaped into someone he wanted, not someone I was." Luke nodded. He had seen the same story before different people, Different towns. Same pattern. He liked control, Clara whispered. Not in loud ways. His control was quiet. A suggestion here. A comment there. A reminder of how I should behave. Look, speak, think. And every time I disagreed, he tightened his hold a little more. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His silence was enough. Luke's hands tightened slightly on the reins. That sounds like a heavy life. It was, Clara said, voice trembling. And the closer the wedding day came, the smaller I felt. The mark on my neck. It didn't come from anything harsh. Not directly. But when someone keeps pulling you into a life you didn't choose, everything starts to feel tight. Luke's eyes softened with understanding. So you left? Yes, Clara breathed. I packed only what I needed. I left a letter, and I took the first train out of the city. Luke exhaled slowly. That took courage. Clara shook her head. It didn't feel like courage. It felt like desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing, Luke replied. They rode quietly for a moment, letting the weight of her story settle into the open air. The plains did not judge her. Luke did not judge her. And that alone eased her chest more than she expected. But there's something else, Clara said softly, her voice trembling again. I don't think he's going to let me leave so easily. Luke looked at her fully now, his expression still calm but more alert. What makes you think that? Clara glanced over her shoulder at the trail behind them, even though she knew no one was visibly there. He has a way of finding things, she whispered. He has people who work for him. He has connections. He doesn't like to lose. And I'm afraid he might come after me. Luke turned his eyes toward the horizon. Has he already tried? Clara hesitated. I'm not completely sure. But this morning, when I left the train station, I felt like someone was watching me, and when I reached the stable, I thought I saw a familiar car parked down the road. But when I looked again, it was gone. Luke's gaze sharpened in quiet thought. He did not show concern in loud or dramatic ways. Instead, he studied the land the way someone does when they expect something unusual might appear again. You're safe with me, he said gently. No harm will come to you out here. Clara's chest loosened at his words, even though he spoke them without force. She believed him without needing proof. Luke was someone who offered safety simply by showing up with steady hands and honest eyes. Thank you, she whispered. They continued riding, but Clara felt a new awareness build inside her. She noticed how Luke glanced back sometimes, checking the trail behind them. He wasn't frightened or suspicious. He was simply careful, steady, and observant. Clara felt grateful for that. She didn't know if anyone was truly following her, but the possibility was enough to make her heart race. After nearly an hour, the land changed slightly. The grass grew shorter. The wind brushed against the ground with cooler breath. A distant ridge cast a long shadow over the land. Luke slowed his horse again, studying the dirt path beneath them. He leaned down slightly, his eyes tracing the ground. Clara watched him curiously. What is it? Luke straightened. Just tracks. Animal? She asked. His answer came slowly. Some of them. Clara felt a small shiver. And the others? Car tires, Luke said calmly. From earlier today. Probably from one of the ranchers. Might be nothing. His voice stayed steady, but Clara sensed the slight change in his tone, a note of quiet attention. Is that unusual? She asked. Not unusual, Luke answered honestly. But out here, every mark on the ground tells a story. So I pay attention. Clara nodded, trusting his judgment more than her own. As they moved forward, she felt the weight of her past following her, not in ways she could see, but in ways she could feel. But unlike before, she didn't feel alone with that weight. Luke was with her, and his presence made the fear a little smaller. By the time the sun began dipping toward the horizon, Clara realized something important. She had shared more of her story in a single afternoon with Luke than she had with anyone in the last year, and she didn't regret it. She felt lighter, clearer, and strangely hopeful. If her past was still following her, then at least she wasn't facing it alone anymore. The sun had begun drifting lower, turning the sky into soft shades of orange and rose as Clara and Luke approached the narrow stretch of land known as Crow's Ridge. The ridge rose ahead of them like a long, uneven spine of rock, with only one trail cutting through it. The path was narrow, barely wide enough for two horses side by side, and shadowed by tall cliffs that made the air cooler as they approached. Luke slowed his horse. "This part gets tight," he said, guiding Clara with a gentle hand motion. "Stay close. The trail curves, and visibility drops for a bit." Clara nodded, trusting him completely now. She followed his lead without hesitation as they entered the shaded pass. The walls on either side rose high, their rocky surfaces worn smooth by years of wind and rain. The air grew still, quieter than the open plains. Even the sound of the horses' hooves seemed softer here, as if the ridge itself demanded silence. Clara felt a strange mix of calm and tension inside her. The trail was peaceful, but her thoughts were restless. She kept replaying her confession to Luke. The story of why she had left the city, the man she feared, and the life she escaped. Luke had listened without judgment. He had believed her. But that didn't mean the danger was gone. Luke glanced back at her occasionally, checking that she was comfortable with the narrow path. "You're doing well," he said when he noticed her careful grip on the reins. "I'm trying," she replied with a small smile. "You're doing more than trying," he said. "This trail isn't easy for someone new." Clara appreciated his encouragement. She had spent years hearing only criticism, soft pressure disguised as advice, and gentle reminders wrapped around expectations. Luke's simple, honest praise felt different. It felt real. As they continued through the ridge, Luke's eyes shifted subtly. He looked not only ahead, but also behind. Watching the opening of the pass they had just entered, Clara noticed. "Are you looking for something?" "Just staying aware," Luke replied calmly. "These ridges echo sounds. You can hear things sooner if you're listening." Clara nodded, though she didn't hear anything unusual. She heard only the wind brushing against the rocks and the soft creaking of their saddles. They traveled deeper into the ridge, and the light dimmed even more. The rocks on both sides glowed faintly with the warm light of the setting sun above, but the lower path was covered in shadow. The trail bent sharply around a corner, forcing Clara to lean slightly to the side as her horse followed the curve. Luke slowed even more. "Stay behind me through this turn. The path gets narrow." Clara followed his instructions, and for a moment everything felt quiet and predictable. She almost relaxed, but then, as they reached the bend, Luke's horse suddenly stopped. His body straightened, and his hand lifted slightly in a silent signal for Clara to pause. Clara's breath caught. "What is it?" Luke didn't answer immediately. He listened. The air was still. The silence felt different now, too thick, too expectant. Then he heard it. Soft steps, slow, careful. Not from them. Clara heard nothing at first. But then, faintly, the sound reached her. The smallest crunch of gravel. A shuffle. Something or someone moving just around the next curve of the trail. Luke's voice was quiet but steady. "Clara, stay close to the wall behind me. Don't move ahead. Don't speak." Her heart raced, but she obeyed instantly, guiding her horse to the side where the rock rose tall and smooth. She trusted him, and his calm tone kept her from panicking. Luke guided his horse forward cautiously, rounding the final part of the curve, and then Clara saw them. A small group of men stood in the narrow part of the ridge ahead. Their clothes were plain but neat, too clean for travelers who had been on the trail for long. Their posture was straight, their faces serious, and they looked like people who were not on this trail by accident. Clara felt her heart thump painfully inside her chest. She recognized the confidence in their stance. She recognized the careful way they positioned themselves, and she recognized the way their eyes scanned the land. These were not random travelers. Luke pulled his horse to a controlled stop, his body positioned protectively between Clara and the group ahead. His voice remained even and calm. "Evening," he said politely. The man at the front of the group stepped forward. His smile was thin, polite, but too practiced. "Evening," he replied. "We're looking for someone." Clara's hands tightened on the reins. She wished she were invisible. She wished she could fade into the shadows of the ridge. She felt Luke shift slightly, as if sensing her fear. Luke kept his expression calm. "People get lost out here sometimes. Who are you looking for?" The man glanced beyond Luke, his gaze drifting toward Clara, even though Luke partly blocked her. He looked like someone who had a picture in his mind and was checking to match it. "A woman," the man said, "traveling alone, left the city unexpectedly. We were told she came this direction." Luke's face remained steady, but Clara felt a quiet strength rising in the air around him. "Not safe for anyone to travel alone out here," Luke said. "But the only person with me is my riding partner. She's no runaway." Clara felt heat rise in her chest. Luke wasn't lying, he was protecting her with calm confidence, not force. The man stepped a little closer. "Mind if we speak to her?" Luke didn't move out of the way. "Trail's narrow," he said simply. "Best to give folks space. If you have questions, you can ask me." The group behind the man shifted slightly. They weren't aggressive, but their presence filled the narrow ridge like a wall. Clara felt her heart beating hard. She knew these men were connected to her old life. She didn't know all of them personally, but she recognized the kind of people her former fiancé sent to solve problems quietly. The man at the front tilted his head. "Sir, we mean no trouble. We just need to make sure she's safe. Her fiancé is very worried." Clara felt a shiver. The word fiancé felt sharp despite the gentle tone. Luke answered calmly, "If she's safe, she'll speak for herself." The man smiled politely, too politely. "Then perhaps she should." Clara felt Luke look back at her. He didn't speak, but his eyes asked a silent question. "Are you ready?" Clara drew in a breath that shook slightly. She remembered everything she had run from: the pressure, the control, the feeling of being watched even when she was alone. And then she remembered why she left. She wanted to breathe freely. She wanted her voice back. She guided her horse forward, just enough so she could be seen clearly. She kept her chin lifted. Her collar was still open from earlier, the breeze touching her skin. She didn't hide it. "I'm not returning," Clara said, her voice soft but steady. All eyes turned to her. The man's polite smile faded just a little, revealing something cold beneath the calm exterior. "Miss Clara," he said, "your fiancé is concerned. He sent us to bring you home safely." Clara shook her head. "Home doesn't feel safe anymore." The man's expression tightened. "You're making a mistake." Luke's voice cut in quietly but firmly. "She said no." The man looked at Luke with a new kind of attention, measuring him, trying to decide what kind of man he was. Luke didn't raise his voice. He didn't shift in his saddle. He simply met the man's gaze with steady calm. Before anyone could speak again, a sudden sound echoed through the ridge, a soft rumble, then another. Clara looked up, alarmed. Luke's head snapped upward too. The ridge was old, the cliffs were steep, and sounds in narrow places had a way of bouncing strangely, but this sound was real. A small rock tumbled down from above, then another. The ground trembled faintly beneath the horse's feet. Luke's voice sharpened. "Rockslide, move." Before anyone could argue, the ridge shuddered again. A cluster of loose stones broke free from the cliff above and fell toward the narrow path. Clara gasped as Luke grabbed her reins and swung her horse backward, guiding her toward the wider part of the trail behind them. The group ahead scrambled, stepping back as dust and small rocks rained down. No one was hurt, but the falling stones created a sudden barrier, a pile of rocks that split the trail between Clara and the men ahead. Dust filled the air, swirling in the low light. Clara coughed lightly, but Luke kept a steady hand on her horse. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, still shaken but safe. The rockslide didn't block the trail completely, but it created enough distance and confusion to break the tense moment. The men on the other side of the rocks looked irritated, not injured, but they also looked stuck. Clara felt her chest expand with relief. She didn't know what would have happened if the ridge had remained calm, but she was grateful for the unexpected turn. Luke guided her horse backward. "We're moving." he said gently but firmly. Now. Clara followed him without question, breathing fast but feeling safer than she had all day. Luke's calm presence anchored her as they retreated from the ridge. As they left the narrow pass and returned to the open land, Clara looked back once. The men were struggling to climb over the new pile of rocks, slowed by the uneven path. Clara turned forward again. Her heart was still racing, but hope flickered stronger than fear. Luke glanced at her. "You did well," he said. Clara breathed deeply, her voice soft. "I finally spoke for myself. Peter Forder. And you won't have to do it alone again," Luke replied. She believed him. The danger wasn't gone. The men hadn't given up. But in that moment, Clara felt something powerful growing inside her, a courage she had almost forgotten she had. And the journey was far from over. The sky had grown darker by the time Clara and Luke reached the old line cabin. It stood alone on a quiet stretch of land, half hidden behind a cluster of tall pine trees. The cabin was small, old, and weathered by years of wind and sun, but it looked sturdy enough to offer shelter through the night. A thin curl of evening breeze brushed past them as they stopped in front of it, bringing with it the smell of pine needles and cool earth. Luke dismounted first, checking the surroundings with the same calm alertness he carried everywhere. His eyes scanned the land behind them, the path they had come from, and the distant outline of Crow's Ridge. He wasn't tense, but he was careful. Clara had come to understand that this was his way he protected without making his protection feel heavy. Clara slid gently off her horse. Her legs were tired, her shoulders ached, and her mind felt full of everything that had happened. She hadn't expected such a long, emotional day. She hadn't expected to face the men searching for her. She definitely hadn't expected a rock slide to come tumbling down at the exact moment she needed space the most. And she certainly hadn't expected someone like Luke to guide her through all of it. Luke helped her with the saddlebags, placing them inside the cabin. The air inside was cool and dusty, but not unpleasant. There was an old wooden table, a pair of chairs, and a simple bed frame with a mattress that looked like it had seen better years. The place was used occasionally by ranch hands during long rides, or travelers needing shelter before night settled across the plains. Clara stepped inside cautiously, her eyes adjusting to the soft glow of dusk filtering through the dusty window. "It's small," Luke said, setting down a lantern he pulled from a shelf. "But it'll keep us safe tonight." "Safe," Clara repeated softly, tasting the word. She hadn't felt safe for a long time. Not fully. Not without fear lingering in the corners of her mind. But now, inside this old quiet cabin, she felt safe enough to breathe. Luke lit the lantern. Warm yellow light filled the room, chasing away the last shades of gray. Clara watched the flame flicker, casting gentle shadows along the wooden walls. "Sit," Luke said quietly. "You've had a long day." Clara lowered herself into one of the chairs. Her fingers brushed against the edge of the table. It was rough, scratched with old marks that told stories she would never know. Somehow, that comforted her. This cabin had been here long before her troubles, and it would remain long after them. It made her fears feel small. Luke stepped back outside for a moment to check the horses and give them water. Clara watched him through the open doorway. He moved with the ease of someone who had spent his whole life outdoors, comfortable, confident, unhurried. There was something steady about him that made the world feel a little less frightening. When he returned, he locked the cabin door gently behind him. "They won't reach us tonight," he said. "The rocks will slow them down. The ridge gets dangerous in the dark. No one will risk crossing it." Clara exhaled slowly. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." Luke sat across from her, his hat resting on the table. "You don't have to thank me. Anyone with sense would have helped." "I'm not sure most people would have," Clara said honestly. "Most people don't want to get involved in other people's problems." Luke looked at her thoughtfully. "It's not a problem when someone's trying to start over. That's just a new beginning." Clara felt emotion rise in her chest. Not sadness, something softer, warmer, like a gentle swell of hope. She clasped her hands together on her lap, grounding herself. Luke, when I left the city, I didn't know what I was running toward. I only knew what I was running from, she said. But meeting you, it feels like the first right step I've taken in a long time. Luke nodded slightly, acknowledging her words with the quiet respect he always offered. You left because you wanted air, space, a life you could choose. That's a brave thing. Even if it didn't feel brave at the time. Clara looked out the small window. The sky had darkened fully, stars appearing slowly, one by one, like soft reminders that the world was wider than her fears. I don't know what happens next, she admitted. You don't have to, Luke replied. And we'll face it piece by piece. That's how the planes work. One sunrise at a time. Clara smiled faintly. One sunrise at a time, she repeated. They fell into a comfortable silence. The lantern flickered. The night deepened, and Clara slowly let the tension drain from her shoulders. She had spent months feeling tightly wound, always preparing for what might happen next. Now she allowed herself a moment of rest. Outside, an owl hooted softly. The sound reminded Clara that the world could be peaceful if she allowed it to be. After a while, she spoke again. Do you think they'll come back? The men from earlier? Luke thought carefully. Maybe. People like that don't always give up quickly. But by morning, I'll have someone here to help. Clara frowned gently. Who? The sheriff, Luke said simply. I sent word earlier when we stopped for water before the ridge. He'll be waiting on the road at sunrise. Clara blinked. You already knew something was wrong. Luke gave a soft, almost apologetic smile. You're strong, Clara. But I could see you were carrying more than you wanted to say. And when people are scared, sometimes they wait too long to ask for help. I didn't want you facing anything alone. Clara's heart warmed. She swallowed gently, touched more deeply than she expected. That means a lot, she whispered. Luke tipped his head slightly. You deserved someone looking out for you. Night settled completely around them, turning the cabin into a small island of warm light in the cool darkness. Clara wrapped a blanket around her shoulders as the air grew colder. Luke checked the window locks and made sure the lantern flame stayed strong. They talked softly about simple things, about the land, the stars, the way the plains look different each season. Luke explained how the grass turns silver when frost comes, and how the morning sun paints everything gold after a storm. Clara listened with a kind of wonder. She had never heard anyone speak about nature the way Luke did, as if it were a living friend. Eventually, Clara's eyes grew heavy. Luke noticed and stood slowly. You can take the bed, he said. I'll sleep in the chair. Clara shook her head. You've done enough for me. I can't take the only bed. You need the rest more than I do, Luke said gently. And I'm used to long nights in chairs. It won't bother me. Clara hesitated, then nodded softly. She wasn't used to kindness without expectation, and it took her a moment to accept it. She lay down on the mattress, pulling the blanket around herself. Luke dimmed the lantern until only a soft glow remained. As she drifted toward sleep, Clara watched Luke for a moment. He sat in the chair with quiet patience, his eyes alert but calm. He wasn't guarding her out of duty or obligation. He was there because he cared, and that feeling filled her with warmth she hadn't known in a long time. The night passed in gentle quiet. Shadows moved lightly on the walls, stirred by the shifting light of the lantern. Outside, the wind hummed through the trees, steady and calm. Clara slept more peacefully than she had in months. When dawn arrived, the first light of morning seeped into the cabin, touching everything with soft gold. Clara blinked awake and stretched, feeling a sense of clarity she didn't expect. Luke was already awake, standing near the window, scanning the horizon. Morning, Clara said, her voice soft and rested. Luke turned with a small smile. Morning. The sheriff should be here soon. Clara rose and stepped beside him, looking out the window. The land looked peaceful under the rising sun. New, full of promise. A few minutes later, the distant sound of a truck engine hummed along the gravel road. Clara felt her heart beat a little faster. But not from fear this time, from relief. From the feeling that her future was finally shifting into a safer place. Luke opened the cabin door and stepped outside with her. The sheriff's truck rolled to a stop. A kind, seasoned officer stepped out, tipping his hat politely. "Morning, Luke," he said. "And you must be Miss Clara. Heard you had a long day yesterday." Clara nodded. "Yes, but I'm ready to move forward now." The sheriff's warm smile reassured her. "We'll make sure you're safe. You're not alone here." Clued. Luke stood beside her, solid and steady. Clara looked at him with gratitude shining in her eyes. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt her breath come easily, freely, without fear pressing on her chest. She wasn't returning to her old life. She wasn't letting her past control her. She had found space, breath, and courage again. And even though Luke would soon ride on to his next journey, Clara knew she would remember him not as a mysterious cowboy or a passing guide, but as the person who helped her discover a new beginning. A beginning she chose, a beginning she could grow in, a beginning filled with quiet mornings, open skies, and a future she could finally call her own. The sun rose higher, bright and warm, and Clara stepped into her new life free at last.